At 7:42 a.m. on August 4th, 2025, the South China Sea was already a pressure cooker. The sun had just cleared the horizon, its pale light flashing off the waves, when a U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornet cut through the sky 65 miles east of Taiwan. From inside the cockpit, the pilot could see nothing unusual at first. Just endless ocean, a ceiling of thin cloud, and the faint shimmer of heat radiating off the glass canopy. Then it came, the piercing tone in his headset, sharp and unmistakable. Enemy radar lock. Not a passive sweep, a hard lock. Someone out there had painted him. Fire control radar zeroed on his position. And not just any aircraft. It was a Chinese J-16 flanker, closing fast at over 500 knots. The warning lights strobed red. The growl in the pilot's ears rose in pitch. This wasn't shadowing. This was targeting. The Hornet's pilot snapped the jet into a violent left brake, muscles straining as G-forces slammed into his chest. His threat receiver blared. Weapons grade lock confirmed. He knew what that meant. At any moment, the J-16 could loose a missile. No warning, no hails, no chance to argue. Just a plume of smoke and fire tearing across the sky. In seconds, his life would come down to instinct. Countermeasures armed, flares primed. The Hornet dropped low, skimming barely 300 feet above the waves. His ECM suite came alive with a low hum, spewing jamming signals into the void. The ocean blurred below him, rushing past at nearly the speed of sound. This wasn't a drill, this was as real as it gets. And above the roar of his engines, the thought came unbidden. One wrong move, and this moment could ignite something far larger than him. He yanked hard again, muscles screaming, deploying brilliant magnesium flares that streaked behind him like miniature suns. They hung in the air, burning furiously, designed to confuse any heat-seeking missile fired his way. Yet the threat receiver kept howling. The lock held. The J-16 was pressing in, an advanced twin-engine fighter bristling with long-range radar and armed with PL-12 and PL-15 missiles. Beijing had built it for moments like this, intimidation without a word spoken. Now the range was collapsing. 40 nautical miles, 1 minute from weapons release. Inside the American cockpit, the air was thick with silence. No chatter, no request for backup. Just the pilot's controlled breathing and the growl of his engines. He knew he was alone in the fight, or so the Chinese pilot thought, because the truth was, he wasn't flying solo. 30 seconds before, another Hornet had launched from the same carrier strike group and now ghosted in quietly from behind, well outside the J-16's radar cone. A flanking maneuver straight from the playbook. If the Chinese pulled the trigger, they'd have a second problem to deal with. A Hornet right on their six. And then, just like that, the tone vanished. The lock disappeared. The J-16 broke hard right, angling back toward Chinese-controlled airspace. No shots fired, no radio calls, no explanation, just a silent withdrawal. For the American pilots, the adrenaline lingered. Their jets reformed, maintaining position in international skies. Calm, professional, but wide awake. The carrier's strike group sat 100 miles west, support still 12 minutes away. And at this altitude, in this theater, 12 minutes might as well be 12 years. Up here, the only thing that mattered was reaction time. Today, the Chinese jet backed off. Tomorrow, it might not. Because this wasn't an isolated scare. Far from it. Between 2014 and 2024, more than 300 close encounters had been recorded between Chinese and Western aircraft over the South China Sea. Some were standard intercepts, conducted professionally, but far too many weren't, and every one of them had the potential to spiral out of control. In May 2023, a Chinese J-16 buzzed so close across the nose of a US RC-135 surveillance plane that the turbulence rattled the American jet like a toy. 20 feet separated them. The Pentagon called it unnecessarily aggressive. Beijing shrugged, calling it standard procedure. Months earlier, in October 2022, a Canadian CP-140 Aurora was intercepted 5 separate times in a single mission. Chinese fighters fired flares directly in front of its nose and jammed its radar. In June that same year, an Australian P-8 Poseidon had its engines nearly shredded when a Chinese fighter dumped aluminum chaff directly into its flight path. The Poseidon only survived because its crew reacted instantly. These weren't accidents. They were calculated moves, gray zone tactics designed to push the limits, to test resolve, to show who controlled the skies over disputed waters. They were a game of brinkmanship where the stakes were anything but theoretical. Military analysts had a name for it: gray zone aggression. Dangerous games played in the space between peace and open war. A space where the risks were real, and one slip could bring everything crashing down. And here's the most dangerous part. Not one of those incidents had led to formal resolution. No crisis hotlines were called, no agreements signed, no lessons learned. Just a reset button slammed down until the next provocation. So when a US pilot's cockpit screamed radar lock on August 4th, 2025, it wasn't an outlier. It was the new normal. The mechanics of what happened that morning are simple, but the implications are chilling. When the Hornet's radar warning receiver lit up, it meant the J-16 had flipped its radar from passive search to full lock. A narrow beam tracked his exact position, speed, and heading with deadly accuracy. The J-16's radar is a phased array, capable of watching multiple targets at once with precision down to mere meters. Once locked, launching a missile is a single button press away. A PL-15 can fly 200 kilometers and close the gap in under 70 seconds at Mach 4. That's all the time a pilot has to live. So the American reacted as doctrine dictated: break line of sight, deploy countermeasures, jam the signal, keep moving. His flares streaked the sky, hot magnesium designed to fool infrared seekers. His ECM suite blasted decoys and phantom signatures, making his Hornet appear displaced or invisible on the Chinese radar. The second Hornet behind the J-16 remained silent, sensors in passive mode, gathering every byte of data. If it had lit up its radar, the Chinese might have fired. Instead, it lurked like a shadow, silent but deadly if called upon. That balance, strength without the first shot, is what kept the world from tumbling over the edge. The problem is time. From the moment a radar lock is established, the distance to a missile launch can be less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds to decide if this is a bluff or an act of war. 4 seconds to choose between restraint and retaliation. One wrong decision, and suddenly the world's two most powerful militaries are spiraling into combat. It wouldn't be the first time. On April 1st, 2001, a US Navy EP-3 surveillance plane was conducting a routine patrol near Hainan Island when two Chinese J-8 interceptors closed in. One pushed too close. At more than 300 knots, it collided with the EP-3's wing. The J-8 shattered instantly, killing its pilot. The American plane limped into an emergency landing on Chinese soil. Its 24 crew members were detained and interrogated for 11 days, while their aircraft was stripped for intelligence. The standoff shook the world and marked a turning point. After Hainan, Chinese intercepts grew sharper, riskier, more aggressive. Every flight was now a test of resolve, and August 4th, 2025 was cut from the same cloth. Another calculated risk. Another US pilot forced to gamble on restraint. No one pulled the trigger, but they could have. Imagine if the Chinese pilot hadn't veered off. A PL-15 missile would have left its rails, climbing high before diving down on the Hornet at 4 times the speed of sound. Less than 90 seconds to react. Even with flares, jamming, and every evasive maneuver in the book, survival would have been a coin toss at best. The second Hornet would then have clearance to retaliate under standing rules of engagement. An AIM-120 AMRAAM would streak off its wing, hunting the J-16 in under 45 seconds, and it wouldn't end there. Both jets belonged to carrier strike groups. AWACS aircraft, cruisers, and destroyers all monitored the sky. One engagement would have tripped alarms across the theater. Aegis cruisers would lock their SPI-1 radars onto every contact in the area. Combat air patrols would scramble. Submarines would surface into firing positions. Within minutes, the entire South China Sea would be lit up like a live war zone. In Beijing and Washington, crisis rooms would ignite. Phones would ring, statements drafted. But once blood is spilled, no amount of talking can rewind the tape. There is no playbook for de-escalating a shoot-down between nuclear powers. Only guesswork. Only hope that leaders blink before the chain of escalation carries everyone over the edge. And that's why August 4th matters. Because the South China Sea isn't just a patch of water, it's one of the world's most contested flashpoints. Beijing claims nearly all of it, even waters that international law assigns to Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and the global commons. To enforce those claims, China has built islands from nothing, armed them with runways, radars, missile batteries, and stationed patrols around them. Under the 2016 Hague ruling, those claims are legally invalid. But China enforces them anyway, with fighters, frigates, and intimidation. Right in the middle sits Taiwan, just 100 miles off the mainland coast. For Beijing, it's a breakaway province that must one day be absorbed. For Washington, it's a partner, a bulwark, and a flashpoint worth defending. U.S. freedom of navigation patrols are meant to demonstrate international rights to operate in these skies. But every patrol carries the same risk the Hornet faced on August 4th. Chinese fighters lock, shadow, harass, and each time, the gap between warning and war narrows. The stakes couldn't be higher. Over $3.4 trillion in trade flows through this corridor each year. Oil tankers, container ships, and fiber optic cables all weave through the same waters. A conflict here wouldn't just be a regional crisis. It would slam global stability into chaos overnight. Every cockpit warning tone, every radar lock is a reminder that the future of half the world's economy hangs by threads measured in seconds. August 4th was just one encounter, but zoom out and the picture is clear. The US and China are locked in what analysts call strategic competition. Not war, not peace, but something dangerous in between. The US Navy still holds global reach and unmatched power projection. But the People's Liberation Army Navy is growing faster than any fleet in modern history, with new carriers, jets, cyber units, and space assets. And Beijing is no longer shy about using them. Radar locks are messages without words, daring the US to blink. But Washington has its own message. Its aircraft will fly where international law permits. Neither side intends to start a war, but both act like it could happen tomorrow. That's the danger. Because both sides believe they are playing defense. Beijing sees US patrols as provocation. Washington sees Chinese radar locks as threats. And without hotlines, without agreed-upon intercept rules, without mutual understanding, the only thing standing between the world and catastrophe is the judgment of pilots hurtling at supersonic speeds. On August 4th, two pilots stared across that gap. One locked, one held the line, one disengaged. But next time, the decision may not fall the same way. And if a missile leaves a rail, there's no way to know how far the fire will spread. This isn't training. These are real missions, real weapons, real consequences. Every close pass, every lock, every flare pushes the edge thinner. One day soon, not firing may no longer be the biggest move of all.